We will now start the program with the recitation of Quran. Please can we welcome Fatima with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واذكر في الكتاب موسى إنه كان مخلصا وكان رسولا نبيا وناديناه من جانب الطور الأيمن وقربناه نجيا ووهبنا له من رحمتنا أخاه هارون نبيا واذكر في الكتاب إسماعيل إنه كان صادق الوعد وكان رسولا نبيا وكان يأمر أهله بالصلاة والزكاة وكان عند ربه مرضيا واذكر في الكتاب إدريس إنه كان صديقا نبيا ورفعناه مكانا عليا أولئك الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين من ذرية آدم وممن حملنا مع نوح ومن ذرية إبراهيم وإسرائيل وممن هدينا واجتبينا إذا تتلى عليهم آيات الرحمن خروا سجدا وبكيا. سجد مستحب. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
We'll now have the main talk by Sheikh Zoheir Ali. Dr. Zoheir Esmail studied accounting and finance at the LSE before qualifying as a chartered accountant. Thereafter, he began pursuing full-time studies in the Islamic Seminaries of Syria and London before moving to Qom, where he has spent the last decade studying and teaching. He was awarded a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Exeter with a thesis title of Between Philosophy and Irfan, interpreting Mulla Sadra from the Qajars to the post-revolutionary Iran. Please can we welcome him with a loud salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. وإني لأبكي في حياتي على أخي، على خير من بعد النبي سيولد، بدمع غريز مستهل مكفكف على خد مني ذائب ليس يجمد صلاة على محمد وآل محمد. So, yesterday we spoke about a relationship between history and memory. And what we were trying to discuss is how to bring together these two seemingly contradictory or two, if you like, ways of looking at the past that seem to come into conflict with each other. And inshallah, today we will try and investigate this a little bit more with a little bit more detail, a little bit more definition around history and memory. But these lines of poetry, which we recited yesterday in the Musibah, and also at the beginning right now, these were the lines of poetry of Kulthum, the daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when she entered into Kufa. And here is one of the prime examples of how the event of Karbala started to become enshrined in the conscience of the Arab society. As you saw in the beginning of her poetry, as I explained last time, and also Imam Zayn al-Abidin's poetry, there is a strong emphasis on the hellfire, waking up people to tell them what you've done is not right. You are going to hell for this. And of course, that is what inspired a movement of repentance, because to be told that so vehemently by the victims is something that would then inspire a kind of waking up from within, such that people then fought against the Umayyad dynasty. But beyond that as well was the capturing of the emotion of the time. These lines of poetry, if we take them, if we think about them, if we try and put ourselves in that place to hear those lines of poetry and really what they meant, because they captured the moment, we can easily connect with the whole event. We can connect with the emotion of the event. And that is what the poetry did. The poetry captured the emotion. The poetry grasped the people at the time, because it awoke them. It hit them with the power that the poetry had. And of course, in that time, poetry was how news also spread. When something was captured in poetry, it was easily transmittable. So you can see here the number of functions that the poetry had in building the memory of Imam Husayn. And here is where we see early poetry focuses on what we call historical truths. And this is how memory can link to history. History, like we said before, is what happened. What we want to do with the process of history is we want to have the clearest picture of what happened. And of course, in order to understand what happened, especially when we were not present at the event, we have to rely on the versions of others. As soon as we step into the versions of others or the ideas of others, then we move into the realm of memory, because it is how they remember the event, okay, or how they understood the happenings of what occurred. So as soon as we move into that territory, then we are one step away from actually being there ourselves. We're relying on others, okay? But there are some truths that everybody admits to. So it doesn't matter which side they were on. It doesn't matter even if they were, directly present at the time. There are some things that history cannot deny. Things like Imam Husayn left Medina, and that he went to Mecca, and that after Mecca he made his way towards Kufa, and then he was diverted to Karbala, and then he fought there. He died, he was killed while he was left alone. He was thirsty, and he was then beheaded, taken his clothes, and trampled on. And the events that occurred before, some of the ones that are absolute historical truths. There's no space, if you like, for a rational and normal person to debate these issues beyond acceptance. These are the things that happened. And the memory focuses on those. It focuses on those things that are not deniable, but tries to capture the emotion here at the early stage of poetry. And what we will see, we might not have time to go into something like that, but one of the things that you will see with poetry, if you have time to look into this kind of field, is that poetry in each time dealt with the concerns of the time. So in each time, as the poetry of Imam Husayn developed, it dealt with what was of primary concern to the people that were there. So this is the function of poetry as it pertains to the early history. Now, before we carry on, I want to just put a couple of definitions of memory out there. Because like we mentioned yesterday, memory is a much larger sphere than history. How something is remembered is sometimes very different to what happened, or can take different forms, okay? And it can develop in different ways. It is almost sometimes like if an event happens and one person hears it from another person, who hears it from another person, who hears it from another person, we will slowly find certain changes in what occurs. And today I'm actually going to show you how the historians themselves sometimes had this effect of, like you have with Chinese whispers, when something starts off one way and then slowly one thing is left out, just one thing, and it completely changes our perception of what happened. And that is a mistake. That is not something that you would necessarily level against a historian. It's just because there is a fallible method in place. So memory is the stories that define cultures to cross over into the realm of the public. Okay, so you have history, which is what trained historians do, and is a reasoned reconstruction rooted in research. Okay, but memory here is how culture is defined. It is how these incidents transfer into the realm of the public, those people who are, not trained in historical research, for example. So from that, it is a collective historical conscience in all of its manifestations. Memory is often treated as a sacred set of absolute meanings and stories, possessed as the heritage or identity of a community. Okay, so you can see here how memory, as it transfers into a community, then starts to shape their identity. Memory often coalesces in objects, sites, and monuments, whereas history seeks to understand contexts in all of their complexity. So in memory, when we use the term memory, we are grouping a lot of things together. We are grouping history as it is remembered by those people who were there, and then how that memory develops and how it is remembered within communities and cultures. And then extrapolate that to the number of years that we have since the event, and extrapolate that to the number of cultural contexts and places that we also have the remembrance of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. So that in a wide sense is what memory is. It is how we remember the event, as opposed to sometimes exactly the academic research of what happened. And like I said to you, these two came into conflict with the ulama as they discussed how the pulpit should be monitored, if you like. What is reasonable to say on the pulpit, or what is allowed to be said on the public. As I showed you with Mulla Hassan Nouri, he was quite firm with what he believed should be said. But we had also a question as well yesterday, that if this is the case, then how are we supposed to balance all of what we have currently, and the historical sources and all of that. And we can understand this as we move into the process of history, to try and now understand the process of what a historian will do. A historian will first have the historical truths. The historical truths are the nodes of their web of understanding. It is, if you like, the things that will define how they are going to understand the event that took place. And then they will have all of the versions that are produced in the books of history, and they will organize them according to value and probability. Okay? So an eyewitness account, for example, has a lot of value. An account that appears in a history book explained by a historian would have less value. than an eyewitness account. Okay? An account from, let's say, a side that is political. Okay? If you can see that there is a political motive behind a certain account, okay, then obviously you would have to be careful with such an account. And we have all of these things within the history of Ashura as well. So what they'll do is they will take all the accounts and they will start to construct a view, a picture, with probabilities. Okay? So some things are 90% probable. For example, if you have an eyewitness account, or maybe if you have 2 or 3. Yeah? And what we'll see, or what we find, is that especially from the beginning of the journey, we're a lot more comfortable. Yeah? We're a lot more comfortable because there's more witnesses. Okay? And as we come closer and closer to the end of the day of Ashura, we start to have a issue of a lack of witnesses. So the historian will, for example, they'll have some things with a good probability, they'll have some things with a lower probability, and then they will try and balance all of these things through going through the different narrations as well, and also dealing with the various issues that that turn up between each of the events. So for example, even when it comes to the martyrdom of a specific personality, we'll have more than one version. So we have to sift between the versions and try and find that version which falls into a framework of understanding. So the intellect here is, if you like, is right at the surface. It is at the surface of deciphering what makes sense and what might not make sense. So now to move into the actual limitations of the history of Karbala. Most of those who witnessed the event from the side of Imam Husayn alayhi afdal salatu wassalam were killed. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. There were 5 men who survived, 3 of whom were injured. So of course Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. There is Hassan al-Muthanna, who was the son of Imam al-Hassan, married to Fatima bint al-Husayn. He was also injured on the day. So like I mentioned in the speech that I gave here on the wilada of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, I mentioned in the earliest source that we have on the history of Karbala, Imam Zayn al-Abidin is portrayed as fighting. So he actually fought on the day and then he was carried off the battlefield. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam as well, if you go with that earliest account, he also was injured on the day and then obviously didn't continue. And Murqa bin Thamama al-Asadi. So these are the 3 that have survived. Now as it pertains to Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, we only have, Abu Mikhnaf only records 2 riwayat from him. So 2 eyewitness accounts from Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. One is concerning the night of Ashura, and the second concerns allowing his request to allow one more night before the actual battle takes place. So Imam Husayn, he requests that one more night be given so that he could spend his night in prayer and achieving closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those are the 2 main eyewitness accounts. There are other accounts as well. So as we move to later sources, we do see other reports from Imam Zayn al-Abidin. But when you look at those reports, for example, there's a large report in the Amali of Shaykh al-Suduq. When you look at those reports as a historian, you might find that it is not the most, if you like, strong report in terms of details and so on and so forth. But there is a report there which can be looked at. There's also a report from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, mentioned in Tarikh al-Tabari, but again it's a report that is not with details. It's a report that doesn't give us enough to really go on as it pertains to the events of the day itself. So there are so that's Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. For the other 2 who were injured, who are Hassan al-Muthanna and Murqa, there are no reports from them. So already out of 5 people, we have 2 people from whom we have no reports. So that leaves us with 3 people. the other two, apart from Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, are Uqba bin Sim'an and Duhaq ibn Abdullah al-Mashriqi al-Hamadani. And both of them related some of the things that they witnessed. Duhaq ibn Abdullah al-Mashriqi, he was a person who accompanied Imam Husayn alayhi salam throughout the events of Karbala, but he had made a deal before he joined the party of Imam Husayn. His deal was that I will fight as long as it is in my benefit, and after that I will take my way. And that is what he did on the day of Ashura. He fought until it came to, and he fought for a lot of the battle until it came to the time for the Ahlul Bayt, and then he did leave. Imam Husayn said to him, he reminded Imam Husayn of their agreement, and Imam Husayn said to him, that's the agreement, you can go if you can find your way out, because obviously the enemy had more or less surrounded and he had fought. But he was clearly a very intelligent man, and he had planned his escape route, and he managed to escape. And he is another personality who we have poetry from, and of course his poetry is about regret. He absolutely, after doing what he thought was the most intelligent thing to do, which was to fight and also, not get killed, afterwards he really regretted his decision, and he regretted it, and we have lines of poetry from him. And again, he joined the Tawabin movement, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, sometimes when we speak about Duhaq, many people look at him in a very negative light, because how can you leave, for example, the grandson of Imam Husayn? But from another perspective, he was someone going through his own journey, somebody who made the biggest mistake, but then he did also regret that mistake and tried to make amends for that. So he is a very important personality, because from him we have a good number of reports. We also have another survivor who was Uqba, the slave of Rabab. Rabab was the mother of Bibi Sukaina alayhi salam. So Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam is recorded as having two daughters, Fatima and Sukaina. Both of them at the time of Karbala were married. They were young, but they were married. So he was included in the caravan, he witnessed the battle, and he witnessed the whole thing, but was then released afterwards by Umar bin Sa'ad, because slaves were just brought along. They didn't really have a choice per se about where they would be, and he was also very old, so he didn't participate in the battle. So when Umar bin Sa'ad found him, he asked him who you are. He said, I'm a slave. He said, okay, then go. He seems to have returned to Medina, but he has fallen into a kind of, we completely lost him after that. No reports from him at all about what happened. So this now is the side of Imam Husayn. We see that as it pertains to the side of Imam Husayn and eyewitness accounts, we have very scant eyewitness accounts. So now that leads us to the other side, the enemy. The enemy, of course, lacks motivation in explaining their role in the atrocities, because many of them were forced to be there, but on top of that, after the sadness that took over the society and the shaking that took over the society, it was not something that was necessarily something to be proud of. It was something that they would have preferred to have just been forgotten. And they were looked at with disdain, obviously. So there was not really much motivation for people to say anything. But there were narrators from the camp of Ibn Ziyad and Umar bin Sa'ad. Some of them tried to put themselves in a positive light. So, for example, Humayd ibn Muslim al-Azdi has given us a lot of reports. And one report that you might have heard is on the day of Ashura, Shimr went towards the tents, and there was somebody that said to him, what kind of person are you going towards the tents? You shouldn't do that. One of those people claimed that it was Humayd, and Shimr asked, who are you? and Humayd said, you don't need to know who I am. But Humayd was a very well-known personality. He was one of the what we call the Ashraf of Kufa, one of the very well-known people of Kufa, and the circles that he mingled in, he was very close to Ibn Ziyad, the circles that he mingled in were the same ones as Shimr. So it was very unlikely that he was unknown to Shimr. So we have to deal with that kind of complexity as well. And another one of Abu Mikhnaf's sources is Hani ibn Thabit al-Hadrami al-Sukuni. And he is a different kind of character because he was proud of what he did and he boasted about what he did. So he was the killer of Muslim ibn Awsaja and two of the sons of Imam Ali alayhi abdullah salatu wasalam. So now, Abu Mikhnaf in total narrates from about 34 people. Okay, most of them, as you can see, are from the army of Yazid, or the army of Ibn Ziyad and Umar ibn Sa'ad. Of those, some reports have come to us about the events before. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin, for example, his reports are about before the battle. Okay, and then we had others who witnessed the battle until a certain point. So now, if we have this issue and the eyewitness accounts are not as plentiful as we want, then what should we do? Because if we want to know the history, then we want to have it from an eyewitness account. So at this point, a historian has to realize and admit limitation. As much as it is perhaps not as, not what we want, we have to admit a level of limitation. What we can do is provide what we have evidence for. And beyond what we have evidence for, a historian has to leave it there, because that is the purpose of history. The purpose of history is to find out what happened through a reliable method and through a way. So in knowing that limitation, then, that is then where, if you like, when that limitation settles in our mind, that is when we can have a conscious reading of history. And when we understand that limitation as well, we can also understand the need, if you like, for the expansion of memory. Or we can tolerate a place for the expansion of memory. If you can only speak up to a point as it pertains to the sources, but you do know that a lot more occurred, then you can tolerate memory. But memory, like I said, not as history. Once the distinction is there, history is one thing and memory is another thing. And perhaps you'll think to yourself, how can you balance these two things? And for that, I just want to give you a little bit of insight into how I got to this point. Because when I was growing up, I used to, of course, in the beginning, your connection to Imam Husayn is emotional connection. I even remember the first time I cried was in a lecture by Batul Auntie. So I even remember exactly the first time when I cried. So your first connection is a connection to Imam Husayn alayhi salam through emotion, through a kind of aligning of purpose, in the sense that he stood up for justice, he stood up for humanity, he stood up for all of the great human values. Okay, and then as the years passed, I would hear many stories which I couldn't identify with. As a person, I couldn't identify with them. They were sad, of course, but not something I could identify with. So that took me then to read. And I used to read all of the different books that were in the English language, until I came across the book of Ayatollah Mutahhari, the one that I referred to yesterday, which was Ashura, Misrepresentations and Distortions. Now that book for me very much changed the way I started to look at this whole issue, because I realized that there were distortions. And of course, Ayatollah Mutahhari was also quite firm in the fact that we should weed out distortions. So with that in mind, then, I realized that more needed to be done. So what I tried to do then is concentrate on the more reliable translations. Okay, so we had Sikkim here published the account of Abu Mikhnaf. Yeah, there was the Kitab al-Irshad, which was also translated. And then, as I continued along that journey, I realized that still more had to be done, because when you hear different accounts, you don't know if it is somewhere. If it can, maybe that account is somewhere and that is where it is coming from, right? So I needed to go further. I needed to know as many accounts or all of the accounts I could find in order to know, is it somewhere or not, right? And that was when I moved to Qum, it was more or less when this book came out, the book that I told you about, Mawsu'at al-Imam Husayn, Fil Kitabi wa Sunnah wa Tarikh, written by a group of scholars, but under the name of Muhammad Ray Shahri. And that book, like I mentioned last time, collected all the original sources or all the early sources. So I had finally something to look at. And again, I kind of hung my hat on the versions that were there. But of course, I was quite passionate about how things should be according to the historical sources. And I remember one of my friends and teachers is also here in the crowd. He used to say, I have a sledgehammer. So I would go anytime anybody said something that was not in the book, I would come with my sledgehammer and, break it down. So that was where I was at that point. And then I finally came to this other book that I mentioned last time, Karbala ilaykum al-Haqiqa, written by Ja'far al-Muhajir. And I realized that I was not the only person who felt like this, who had gone through this journey. Because the writer of that book was much older than me, but had also been in the circles of the ulama and had seen the progression of the ulama and had gone through his own personal journey until he had come to what he felt was the most accurate historical picture of Karbala. But then at the same time, as my appreciation grew for art forms and as my appreciation grew for the importance of connection, I started to realize that we perhaps cannot disregard how everybody connects. It is almost too extreme to disregard everything else. And then, of course, because of my connection to philosophy, I saw that there's a difference between the modern period and the postmodern period. In the postmodern period, nowadays, we think slightly differently than we did in the modern period. And of course, as I'm growing up, I'm affected by the modern period. Like I said last time, the very scientific, wanting it to be very cut and dry kind of movement as it pertains to religion and myth and all of that kind of thing. So then what I'm trying to do here is present a way in which we can put it together, because I think for the postmodern era, we do need to think beyond our own boundaries as well. In a world of live and let live, we should also let live, right? If we believe in a world of live and let live, and we think that people connect in different ways, and we're happy to let people connect in different ways, then we should let them, but distinguishing a very clear distinction between that which is history and that which is memory. And when you can distinguish memory from history, you can tolerate memory even as an art form. Because memory itself now has a history. We have the history of memory. So in the academic field, it's happened now. If you like, all of those ways of expressing Karbala have happened. So now we have the study of how that happened, the study of how people connect to that, how people in different contexts, if you like, connect to the story of Imam Husayn alayhi afdalus salati was salam. So this is where I want to try and bring the discussion. And of course, I'm on my own journey as well. Everybody's on their own journey, and how to balance these things that we see in society versus, if you like, the more academic discussions that come to us, our own sense of criticism, our own passion. Like I said, I did go through the stage of the sledgehammer. So our own passion and what we feel strongly about, all of those things need to be balanced until we come to the most nuanced position we can find. Because at the end of the day, that is what the academic process is all about. It is about finding nuance and balance. The more nuanced and balanced an opinion is, the more value it has in academic discussion. So that as a sort of sidetrack, but now going back to the sources, a book that stands out is the account of Abu Mikhnaf. And although we did, as Sikkim translated that account of Abu Mikhnaf, there are different accounts of Abu Mikhnaf. Abu Mikhnaf was a historian in the 2nd century. Okay? He had a very keen historical awareness, and he realized the importance of eyewitness accounts. Eyewitness accounts were key to if you like, enshrining the movement of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. So he went and he searched after eyewitness accounts. But of course, by the time he was searching, many of the people had passed away or had been killed actually by the movement of the Ta'ibin, because the Ta'ibin had revolted. So many of these people had passed on. So he was taking second-hand eyewitness accounts. Okay? That is the maximum of what we have. We don't have eyewitness, we have second-hand eyewitness accounts. Okay? So he went and he did that, and he sifted between the various reports as well, because obviously when you have things second-hand, you have to sift between the various reports. Now, the account of Abu Mikhnaf, unfortunately, is lost. But what we have is a preservation of as much of the account that we have in the Tarikh of At-Tabari. Okay, so in the Tarikh of At-Tabari, we have a preservation of that account. Now, Ray Shahri, when he comes on to discussing the Maktal or the book of Abu Mikhnaf, he classifies it as one of the unreliable sources. The reason he does that is because he's talking about the published version, which is not in At-Tabari. Okay? So when you see a discussion about the account of Abu Mikhnaf, it is talking about a published version, which is not the version that is in At-Tabari. He then goes on to use the account of Abu Mikhnaf copiously in the encyclopedia itself. Now, the account of Abu Mikhnaf is not just, again, a source you can just go and take everything from. Is again a source that needs to be evaluated. There are certain accounts in there that need to be thought about a little bit more. I have wanted to bring an illustration today about how the historical sources themselves are sometimes confused, but since we are at 40 minutes, I will inshallah end it here for today and then pick up inshallah from tomorrow. If there are any questions, then inshallah.
Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Are there any questions from either side?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you for the lecture. Following up on what you said yesterday and what you built in today, when you talk about the expansion of memory and the role that it has in how we understand our history, we know that memory is sometimes has biases against people of color, against women. And even if you look at the accounts that we have of the women of Karbala, they were women of status. What of the women that did not have status? So when we are considering expansion of memory, is there any room to perhaps understand, evaluate of all those voices that have been lost? You briefly sort of spoke about it yesterday when you spoke about the children who died in the caravan journey from Kufa to Sham. But I wanted to know your thoughts on all these voices that have been lost, and perhaps in our ability to connect to what happened, is it possible to understand these voices that have been lost?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Here, it also gives me an opportunity to clarify something as well. When I talk about the role of imagination in memory, when I talk about the role of imagination, I mean creativity, but not moving away from truth. Okay, so that is the balance that has to be brought together. Now, when you talk about other voices, okay, how would you, if you like, put yourself in the position of other voices that were there, and what medium would you use? If you're using a medium of, if you like, narration, or saying that this is what happened, you would be in a problematic area. But if you moved into an area of, if you like, poetic license, an art form or something like that, that is perhaps an area that can be explored. Yeah. So this is the difference here. There were other voices, but sometimes the other voices are silent. Like you say in history doesn't record all of the voices. So we cannot give a voice to those voices because we might not be doing them any justice at all. We might not be explaining the way they felt. We might not be doing anything. Not as a fact, but as an imagination, as a storytelling with that clear kind of motive. That is in fact what happens in cinema many times. I'm sure you've seen all of these accounts that they do of the various imams, even the story of Bibi Maryam, all of those, they all had creativity. The story of Ashab al-Kahf, it has all of this creativity. Most of that, is not attested too much. So if you like, there is a role, but in the sphere of art. Once you enter the sphere of art, and it's clear that that is the sphere, then it's an art form. It's a form in which you would like to connect in the sphere of art. That's okay. Yeah?
Thank you very much for your talk. You mentioned your own personal approach, which was really looking at the history and going with a sledgehammer against everything that wasn't there. And I think most of the people in this room probably sympathize with that perspective and probably carry that perspective with them. You also said that in a postmodern era, we work towards understanding that people might have different ways of remembering Karbala and that we should work towards that. I think the challenge for most of us is, where is it that it changes from being an interpretation, a memory, to being a distortion, an exaggeration? And yes, with historical sources, you may have objective measures by which you can grade the value of that contribution, perhaps less so with history, less so with memory. Sorry, I mean less so with memory rather than history, because there isn't that gradation. There isn't, looking at the hadith studies and how you'd classify sources of information.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think here the ulama have given some boundaries. So the boundaries in terms of anything that would give a negative portrayal of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalu salatu wasalam. If you like, that's the first principle. The first principle to lay down in this respect. As it pertains to distortion and things like that, I think it comes down to where each individual finds themselves on a spectrum. You'll sometimes be able to empathize with a person to their level. So let me give you an example. Once I went to Umrah. I was in a room with a young man and an old man. The old man, the way he identified with religion was from the praising of Imam Ali. Anything, as long as it had the praising of Imam Ali, that for him was great. And the young man wanted to intellectually come at me about every small thing, that was on his mind. Okay? Now, both of these people identify with Karbala differently. Okay? Do I have to take the old man out of where he is and move him into where I think he should be? Or can I tolerate him and just say that, it has some, in my view, it has distortions. Okay? In my view, there is a clearer picture and a better picture. But, you're on your own journey and you have to find that out for yourself rather than me enforcing that per se. This is, if you like, why I bring this up about a kind of tolerance of others who are there and letting them take their time to the journey. It is a journey I believe everybody should take. Everybody should take a movement towards a more historical view. And in fact, where I see, if you like, an ideal place for us to reach is everybody has a great idea of history and we have a flourishing literary culture in which we develop English literature and we connect through the emotions through the English language using the high forms of English poetry, because they are there. We just don't have a culture of it. In other cultures, Urdu poetry and all, they have a culture in which they produce, and especially in Arabic poetry, it's a culture that's there. So that's the ideal. But how we get to that ideal, we need to have some room to tolerate, in my view, yeah. So there is a clear boundary. There are distortions. There are things that are not in the historical sources. But now what do you do and how do you deal with that?
Thank you. We might stop to give you some time, inshallah, before Salah.
Salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the subplots that occurs on the events of Karbala is a relationship which Imam Husayn alayhi salam has with one of his wives. Her name was Rabab bint al-Amri al-Qais, and she was the mother of Sukaina. There is poetry attributed to Imam Husayn where he speaks about the beautiful family life that he has with Rabab and Sukaina. How he loves a house in which these two are present. And of course, after the events of Karbala, Rabab bint al-Amri al-Qais, she has lines of poetry which are attributed to her. She says, surely he who was a light that people would be illuminated by was killed in Karbala and is not buried. The grandson of the Prophet, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him for us. The one who diverted the unfortunate balance. So he's the one who prevents you from getting a unfortunate balance on Yawm al-Qiyamah. He was to me like a strong mountain that I would seek refuge in. And he would deal with us with mercy and with religion. Who is for the orphans? And who is for those who ask? Who will make those people who are poor needless? By Allah, I do not need any relationship after having the relationship with the family of the Prophet until I become hidden between sand and clay. وَإِنَّ الَّذِي كَانَ نُورًا يُسْتَضَاءُ بِهِ بكربلاء قتيل غير مدفون سبط النبي جزاك الله صالحة عنا وجنبت الخسران الموازين قد كنت لي جبلا صعبا ألوذ به وكنت تصحبنا بالرحم والدين من اليتامى ومن للسائلين ومن يغني ويأوي إليه كل مسكين والله لا أبتغي صهرا بصهركم حتى أغيب بين الرمل والطين ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Brothers and sisters, we've got a few minutes before Salah just to prepare, and then we'll have adhan soon, inshallah. Just to mention, sorry, after Salah, we'll resume the program with the Maktal and Matam, and followed by Tabarruk, inshallah.
Worked. My SharePoint. Oh, did it? Nice. Yeah.
I don't know. Let me check. Yeah. Okay. What? A minute. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't checked. Right. If you've checked, then yes.
I haven't checked. I was told.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Aliyan Waliyullah. Hayya ala salat, hayya ala salat, hayya ala al-falah, hayya ala al-falah, hayya ala khairil amal, hayya ala khairil amal. Qad qamatis salat, qad qamatis salat. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal arda hanifan wa ma ana minal mushrikeen. Allahu Akbar. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin ar-rahmanir rahim maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانهر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. حول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. رب صل على محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد حول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية وبالفوز بالجنة ورضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد. سمع الله لمن الله. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. بحول الله وقوة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. رب صل على محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. حول الله وقوة. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل. الله أكبر. حول الله وقوة. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده ربي صل على محمد. سمع الله لمن. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله الله الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إنه ليس لعلم بموضع رزقي وإنما أطلبه بخطرات تخطر على قلبي فأجول في طلبه البلدان فأنا فيما أنا طالب كالحيران لا أدري في سحل هو أم في جبل أم في أرض أم في سماء أم في بر أم في بحر وعلى يدي من ومن قبل من وقد علمت أن علمه عندك وأسبابه بيدك وأنت التي تقسمه بلطفك وتسببه برحمتك. اللهم فصل على محمد وآله واجعل يا ربي رزق قالي واسعا ومطلبه سهلا ومأخذه قريبا ولا تعنني بطلبي ما لم تقدر لي فيه رزقا فإنك غني عن عذابي وأنا فقير إلى رحمتك. فصل على محمد وآله وجد على عبدك بفضلك إنك ذو فضل عظيم. اللهم
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Keeping it short again today, I can see again a few new faces, and I wonder if there's anybody sitting here who has not heard about the Salam Center project. Just raise your hand so that I can go a little bit more detail. Or have you all heard about it? So, inshallah, that building, that wonderful iconic image that we have been seeing the picture of, inshallah, the work will begin on that on the 5th of September to be completed, 5th of September this year, to be completed by the 15th of December the following year, when we would see the complete building ready to see, as we have for so long been wanting to see. The contractors are an Edgeware-based organization called TNV Construction Limited. It's a very reputable organization with a £20 million turnover, and we have seen them in their offices several times, and they've been here as well. They're of East African origin. For those of you who are from East Africa would recognize that back home, whether it was our Imambara or Masjid or school, it was the Kanbi community who used to build, and this is the same community. So inshallah we'll get a first-class, robust product. It is a contract the contract has been agreed to be a design and build contract. That means that the contract you signed for, the sum that you signed for, is a sum that you finally pay without any changes or any additions whatsoever, other than if we were to make our own changes or variations, which for this superstructure, the shell and core structure, I don't see any reason why we would need to change. The drawings are there in quite detail and design. So to recollect from yesterday, it's just under £6 million contract. We have 3.25 million in our account. As I stand today, we'll be receiving another £500,000 over the next 12 months. So we'll be at 3.75 with a shortfall of 2.25. And let's all try, everybody sitting here, let's try and raise that 2.25 million, so that if we raise that, it gives us the strength of moving on to the next phase of the project, which would be fitting out internal parts of it as well. So as I said yesterday, some of you have already got a standing order. Please see if you can enhance it. Those of you who have donated, see if you can donate it again. And those who have not contributed at all so far, please come and talk to me. No matter how little, we would love you to contribute and be part of this family, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Now we will start the Maktal and Marshia. We hope that the delivery of the most poignant aspects of Imam Husayn's journey through a series of conversations will help our audience better relate to and encourage further observations of this pivotal episode in our history. Great effort has been made to keep true to authentic sources such as Sheikh Mufid, as well as tapping into different forms of observation across the Shi'i world. We are always open to suggestions and comments that help us on our collective journey towards fulfilling our duties towards Allah.
As the night of the 9th of Muharram crept upon the horizon, Imam Husayn summoned the male members of the camp to him. When they had gathered around him, he said to them,
I glorify Allah, blessed and the Most High, with a blessed glorification. I praise Him in both prosperity and adversity. Indeed, I have not known any companions better or more loyal than mine, nor have I known a family more worthy and virtuous than mine. May Allah grant you all a great reward on my behalf. O people, I have lost hope in the people of Kufa. They are thirsty for my blood and will not spare me. O men, Know therefore that I relieve you of the obligations in the pledge of allegiance that you made to me. Take the darkness of this light as a cover and save yourselves.
Then Imam called the sons of Akil who had accompanied him.
O sons of Akil, the death of Muslim is a sufficient loss for you. I give you permission to spare your lives.
The sons of Akil responded to Imam.
Glory be to Allah. Will we abandon our sheikh, our master and our uncle, the like of whom the world has not seen? No, we will shoot arrows alongside him. We will thrust spears alongside him. We will strike swords alongside him. We will give up our lives, our children, our women, our wealth, and our property for you. We will fight alongside you and go wherever you go. Life would not be worth living without you.
Then Muslim bin Awsaja came to Imam and said,
How is it possible to leave you? What excuse would we give to Allah for not defending you? We will defend you to the last, so that it will be clear that we defended the honour of the Prophet through you. O Husayn, there is but one death, and to taste it for you is the greatest honour.
Others also stood in turn and expressed similar pledges of loyalty. The Imam thanked them one by one and prayed for each of them. The anguish of Lady Zainab on the eve of Ashura.
मसाइब हो न घबराइयो ज़ैनब जितने भी मसाइब हो न घबराइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्म सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब आशूर की शब आई अलमदार तुम ही हो इस काफिले की काफिला सालार तुम ही हो बच्चों की खबर लीजियो बहलाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्म सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब खो जाए सकीना तो उसे ढूंढ के लाना हो बाप के सीने पे तो आहिस्ता उठाना बाबा नहीं अब आएंगे समझाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्म सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब खैमों में लगे आग तो आबिद को जगाना छिन जाए रिदा सर से तो आंसू न बहाना कैदी भी बनाए तो चली जाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्म सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब ले जाए सज्जादे गिरामी तुम साथ भतीजे के चली जाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्मो सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब जब शाम के बाजार से सरनंगे गुजरना घबरा के सितम से कभी फरियाद न करना बस भाई का सर देख के रह जाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्मो सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब रोएगी मेरी याद में दिन रात सकीना मर जाएगी जिंदान में घुट घुट के सकीना जिंदा में मासूमा को दफनाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्मो सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब क़ैदे सितम शाम से जब छूट के जाना रुदादे आलम नाना के रोज़े पे सुनाना दूरों के निशा अम्मा को दिखलाइयो ज़ैनब जितने भी मसाइब हो न घबराइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्मो सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब हर ज़ुल्मो सितम शान से सह जाइयो ज़ैनब पर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम
This is narrated by Imam Zainul Abidin.
At the camp of Karbala, I was stricken with illness. On the eve of Ashura, my aunt Zainab looked after me as I rested. My father Husayn, he entered the tent and said,
O time, shame on you as a friend. At the day's dawning and the sun setting, how many a companion or seeker of yours will be killed? Time will not be satisfied with any substitute. The final affair rests with the Mighty One, for every living being journeys back to him along the path.
He repeated these verses 2 or 3 times. I heard these verses and realized what he meant. Tears choked me. I pushed them back. I kept silent and knew that tribulation had come upon us. As for my aunt, she heard what I heard. She ran to the Imam. She cried out,
Then I will lose a brother, if only death would deprive me of life on this day. I only have you, for my mother, my father, and my brother have all passed away.
O sister, Be patient, for Allah has ordained a time for each of us. Stay strong, as your journey will not end here, my father replied.
Your life will be violently wrenched from you, and that is more wounding to my heart and harsher to my soul.
Zainab fainted. Husayn sprinkled water on her face and consoled her.
O sister, fear Allah and take comfort in Allah. This earth is merely a temporary abode. We will all die and return to Allah. My grandfather, my father, my mother and brother were all better than me, and yet their souls have also returned to Allah. O sister, you must not tear your clothes, nor scratch your face, nor cry out with grief and loss when I am killed.
After this, my father instructed his followers to bring their tents close together, so that the enemy could only attack from one direction. My father had brought cane and firewood to place in the ditch, which had been dug during the night. He said,
When they march against us and fight us, we will set the wood on fire, and so we will not be open to attack from the rear.
The beginning of the day of Ashura. After the morning prayers on the day of Ashura, the Imam and his men organized their ranks for battle. When the enemy advanced towards him, Imam Husayn, he raised his hands and prayed.
O Allah, I put my trust in you in every tribulation. You are my hope in every distress. You are my trust and provider in every affair that falls upon me. Regardless of how much the heart may weaken, the strategies fail, the friends abandon, and the enemies celebrate with glee. Grant me relief and dispel the calamity, for you are the master of all bounties, the owner of all benevolence, and the ultimate destination of all desires.
Shimr shouted out,
O Hussein, look at the fire behind you. Are you hurrying towards it before the day of judgment?
You are the one who deserves the fire,
retorted the Imam. Muslim ibn Awsajah drew his sword towards Shimr and asked permission from Imam to fire. Imam replied,
Muslim, do not fire at him. I will not be the one to initiate battle.
The Imam mounted his camel and rode towards the enemy and addressed them. This was his first sermon on the day of Ashura.
People, listen to what I have to say and do not hurry to fight. I would like to remind you of your duties towards me and explain the reason why I came to you. O people, I am the grandson of the Prophet of Allah. Is it permissible for you to kill me and dishonor my family? Am I not the son of the daughter of your Prophet? Am I not the son of his cousin, the first believer in Allah? Is Hamza, leader of the martyrs, not the uncle of my father? Is Jafar at-Tayyar not my uncle? Have you not heard the saying of the Messenger of God, referring to me and my brother as the masters of youth of paradise? Is this not sufficient to stop you from shedding my blood? What I am saying is the truth, for, by Allah, I have never told a lie. If my lineage is not enough to prevent you, then consider what reason do you have to kill me? Have I confiscated any of your wealth? Have I killed any of your people? You asked me to come to help you, and I have answered your call. Now you have turned your swords against me, and are asking me to obey those who are against the Holy Quran, those who change the truth, those who are instruments of Shaitan, those who are trying to extinguish the tradition of the Prophet. My only aim is to seek reform of the Ummah of my grandfather, for which I am ready to die. I want to enjoy good and forbid evil, and return to the Ummah to the way of the Prophet. You have a clear choice today. If you accept what I said, join me, and your reward is with Allah. If you continue to oppose and deny me fair treatment, then decide what you are going to do and delay no more. Indeed, my guardian is Allah.
Fearing a change of heart in his army, Umar ibn Sa'd decided to mount an attack. He placed an arrow in his bow and shot it towards the rank of the Imam, saying,
Bear witness that I was the first to shoot an arrow towards Hussein.
A shower of arrows followed, and the battle begun.
दश्त करबल में तेरा लाश तीरों पे परा, रो रही थी ये ज़मीं आसमां रोता रहा। हाय मादर वो तेरी बहन ये करती रही, है मेरे प्यारे हुसैन गोद में आ वो ज़रा।
صرخت فاطمة الحسين قتل يرقد على السحم وحبيبي ولدي
या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। वारिसे इल्म नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। तेरे असग़र का गला, तेरे अकबर का जिगर, भाई अब्बास के गम में तेरी टूटी कमर, और पामाल बदन करबला में तेरा घर।
ذبحوا كل بني تسجد تجبي تشكر خالقك يا إله الأزلي
नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। वारिसे इल्म नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली रन में तलवार बिना आए अब्बास अली, हर तरफ हमला हुआ मुश्क पानी बिछ दी, आँख में तीर लगा और बेबस्त हुआ, दोनों बाजू को कटा के गिरा उस पे जरी।
كل الوفا يصرخ بدو السماء سقط عباس جري من حسان خشبي
नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। वारिसे इल्म नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। हाय बेशीर तेरा बेज़बां कत्ल हुआ, प्यास के बदले जिसे जुल्म का तीर मिला, अलक़मा रोती रही तुम्हें जब उसका लहू अपने चेहरे पे मला।
وبكى نهر الفرات راحت من جسم حياة عند وصل السحم على حلقوم السكين
नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। वारिसे इल्म नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही। अस्र आशूर का वक़्त कैसे हम भूल सके, आई आवाज़ अज़ां घोड़े से गिरे, ख़ैमे के दर पे तेरी बहन खू रोती रही, था तेरा पाक गला शिमर के तेग़ तले।
فأنا ربك ينظرك ثم الله يقول ارجعي إلى ربك
नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली, तेरे सदक़े
दश्त में तन्हा सकीना तेरी रोती रही तौक में बांधा गया तेरे आबिद का गला तेरी मजलूम बहन बेरिदा शाम चली अशआरु कुल्लुल खियाम फीहा बनाउल इमाम उज़हिबू अहल नबी इला क़स्र उमवी फारिसे नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही फारिसे नबी या हुसैन इब्न अली तेरे सदक़े से मिली ज़िंदगी को यही
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين السلام عليك وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته